Hello, I'm Mario Sylvander, College Counselor at MDA, and this is a presentation delivered in October of 2015 that I'm going to narrate for you now. So let's begin. You can see these are the variety of topics that I'm going to cover in the next 30 to 45 minutes. I'll try to be efficient about the time and get to all of those. Questions can be addressed to me personally, send them by email, just be in touch at school if need be. So I want to just begin things by acknowledging and pointing out, in case you were unaware, that there are a number of very worthwhile institutions to explore in Israel if that's of interest to your student and family. You can see the different ones listed there with the information about each, a short bit of information. You're welcome to pause this presentation and look more carefully at what each of them offers, and obviously go explore their websites. There's a little closer view. What's interesting to note is that they tend to have, for these English language programs anyway, they have a standard application admissions methodology that is similar to the US, looking at GPA, SAT, and either TOEFL or IELTS score, and then it gives some guidelines there. Would be a bit cheaper than your typical private institution in the US, FYI. And it came from, as you will see here, this website, which I would encourage you to explore if you're interested. And by the way, as you can see up here, most of the programs are 3-year programs. So that can actually be a time and money saving endeavor as well. Wanted to really talk in some generalities about this U.S. college system. And a first thing to be aware of, for example, is that the two words in the context of higher education in the U.S. that are actually used interchangeably are colleges and universities. So again, they're two different things technically, but in regular everyday speech, Americans will refer to one or the other and they mean the same thing. And typically what we're talking about here is the undergraduate degree. Which is typically 4 years. So let's take a look at what a liberal arts and sciences college does. Again, it's a 4-year bachelor's degree, and you can study, this is just a sample of the variety of things, of which there are many possible majors at these institutions. I put in green those that might be a surprise to some because they have not the right idea or understanding of what liberal arts and sciences means. It means it includes these things that are in green. It doesn't mean you're only studying a sort of blend of humanities courses. And in the United States anyway, these two red ones, law and medicine, you can't major in those and get a degree in those at the undergraduate level. Those are only for graduate degrees. And so you can study pre-law and pre-medicine. Typically, if you did those, you would choose to major in something else altogether. Same 4-year degree, bachelor's of art, bachelor's of science, or bachelor's of fine art. You can see it. This is just, again, a random sampling that, in fact, is probably pretty similar to the one before it. If you look back there, you look at some of the names, music and Asian studies and maths and sciences. It's the same things here, with a couple of exceptions and a couple only. And they would really include the more specialized professional programs that can be done in either 4 or 5 years, namely architecture and engineering. And then very often business administration is offered at universities, but it may be that some universities don't offer it and you have to major in something like economics as well. So indeed, these are offering the same degree at the undergraduate level, which is partly why they're used interchangeably. And if you want to go to a university to earn a master's or a law degree or a PhD or a medical degree, they're equal, completely equal degrees. You have to apply to graduate programs from either college or university. Let's move on to a fun topic, which is the selectivity, the increasing selectivity of an elite group of universities in the United States. You're well aware of that, I'm sure. If you look at this graph, it's of no surprise to anybody that these elite schools, the sort of elite of the elite, have grown increasingly selective over the years. And in fact, if we were to see 2015, I suspect it would go even lower. But I want to give you a dose of perspective here. And this is a pie graph of all the four-year colleges, and then this red slice here, the line really that you see, represents Harvard, Princeton, MIT, Stanford, Yale that we just saw the admission rates for. So though that is what they represent in the scheme of all of the four-year colleges and universities in the United States. That data comes, by the way, roughly from from the U.S. Department of Education, which shows in 2011-12 there are roughly 3,000. I used a number to calculate the percentage of this graph that's more in line with the 1990 number, because obviously every year with openings and closings, those numbers actually change of the total number of universities. So I was using a fairly conservative number there. So that's a very narrow slice, very elite. Understandable that it would be hard to get into something that is so elite. Let's throw some other schools into the mix. I'm sure you recognize all of these highly selective, also elite colleges and universities. Some are public, some are private. And so there's 16 there, you don't have to count them. But if you now look at the graph, the pie graph, of all the four-year colleges, we still got our, 0.2% little red slice here. So we've thrown in the 16 that you just saw. I actually then threw in as well all of the Ivy League, of which there are 8, plus MIT and Stanford. Gets us up to 26 out of the 2,185. So we're 1%. Yet a very narrow slice to even achieve one of those schools you saw in the big grouping there along with the Ivies. So a very narrow slice indeed that a lot of people are trying to get to. Well, let's expand our view a little further and look at this graph. And I'm now throwing in the Forbes top 100 schools on top of the 31 that we've looked at thus far. Now, a quick word about Forbes. In theory, you've heard about that magazine and you respect what they do. This, if you take a quick look, talks about their criteria for ranking the colleges. And what you'll see from the top 10 that I've included here is that indeed what Forbes is doing, because we're talking about undergraduate degrees, is they're including a combination of colleges and universities, because they're all offering that same bachelor's degree. And lo and behold, the first 2 places this year, 2015, are occupied by liberal arts and sciences colleges, followed by Stanford, then Princeton, then Yale. Harvard doesn't come in until number 5. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with this ranking. I'm going to talk more about rankings in a moment. But you can understand that clearly this group at the top is a mixture of the so-called liberal arts and sciences colleges and the universities you've all heard of through the U.S. News and World Report ranking. But because U.S. News and World Report does not combine the colleges and universities, it is less useful when you're considering undergraduate degrees. So, and again, as part of their criteria, they say here, we're not at all that interested in what gets a student into college, like our peers who focus heavily on selectivity metrics such as high school class rank, SAT scores. They're obviously referring to U.S. News and World Report. Forbes says our sights are set directly on return on investments. What are students getting out of college? And that's hard to argue with as criteria to judge schools by. So jumping back to our graph, we can see that by taking the top 100 from Forbes, which by the way includes these Ivies and these as well. But if you include them and you still have this narrow slice of the whole pie, meaning it's that selective group, guess what? You're going to see among those top 100 from Forbes names of universities that a good number of you probably are unfamiliar with. And what this suggests, and the reason that I've done this little zooming exercise, is to try to have you understand that it's worth doing some exploration on schools that maybe you haven't heard of, but maybe are still part of an elite group of schools that occupy that narrow a slice of the whole. So who wouldn't be happy and satisfied in attending a school that falls basically in the top 5% of all the schools ranked? So transitioning a little bit here, let's in the context of understanding the wide variety of really good schools that are going to be possible for students to apply to and attend, it's important when you're considering where to apply that you basically have this strategy in mind. It's great to dream. I support dreams, and I want students to be ambitious and go for it, to the tune of maybe 1 to 3 of those reach type schools. Then, to be a little more realistic, yet still not for sure, a student can target another 2 to 4 that they think they've got a real fair chance at. Still unpredictable a bit, but a better chance than those reaches. And then finally, I consider it a fundamental part of my job to be sure that every student applies to a minimum of 2 safety schools. That is to say, 2 schools that we can fairly predict will admit the student. And that's for the worst case scenario. In the worst case scenario, a student doesn't get into any reaches or targets. They still have a choice of 2. And very often families and students focus their interest and their research on these reach schools and maybe these target schools. But in fact, it's critical that every student find 2 safety schools that A, they would love to attend. B, they will be admitted. Of course, that's A, really. A, they will be admitted. B, they would love to attend. C, they'll have a good, challenging education. D, they'll have a great time there. And those exist for every student. And it means looking for them and identifying them and applying to them. So a quick look at sort of how the schools shape up and size up. We consider small schools to be 1 to 3,000 students. That's obviously a lot bigger than MDA. Our students may well feel the most comfortable in these small kinds of schools. And again, it's going to be a mixture of colleges that are private and public. So here you've got actually a private college, a private university, and a public college. Next grouping, roughly speaking, is your 3 to 10,000 student medium schools. Again, you've got a mixture of universities and colleges, public and private, and several thousand of them. So there really are going to be a good number of choices out there for every student. Still getting bigger, you've got colleges and universities, or actually you're probably out of the realm of colleges at this point. But you've got private and public universities that are the so-called large size, and then you get into the extra large, again, privates and publics with 15,000 plus students. It's important to recognize how widespread the concentrations of colleges are. In fact, college towns, as they're called. I only point this out and urge you to research this AIER site to understand their rating of these different cities and how many different amenities and resources and other students there are in these cities that make them really good places for students to be and study and thrive. And sort of lastly, and this is a bit of a topic, I want to urge students and families to consider not seeking the familiar, but seeking the unfamiliar. In other words, if you're from a vibrant city like Panama, would you consider going to school somewhere that is not this kind of a hot and tropical type of climate, but also obviously very urban as well? And maybe consider someplace that has the great outdoors nearby, the mountains, rivers, other kinds of activities available that are different from Panama, fundamentally different. And part of why I would encourage everyone to really go for something that's different from what they are familiar with is, studies have been done that show that the friends one makes at school really is the same in number regardless of the size, school, or location for that matter that one goes to. So it's not going to affect your friendships. Everywhere you go is going to allow you, 7 to 10 really close lifelong friendships probably, regardless of this large or small size or location of the school. When doing your research, you've got all kinds of resources out there, both on the internet, obviously, but a good resource that I like to use is this FISC Guide to Colleges, available in bookstores. A similar one is the Princeton Review. And I do want to point out that it makes sense for Jewish families to be looking at the Hillel website that's full of great information about the Hillel organizations on campuses that help make life for Jewish students all the more happy and comfortable and successful. Okay, big topic that I have some things to say about. Rankings. My fundamental advice is to look at as many rankings as you can. And that's different from the advice of pay attention to the US News and World Report. These are out there. There's a new one coming out, it seems, every month or so. And so rather than say, oh, don't pay attention to the rankings, they all use different criteria, you just shouldn't pay attention to them, I acknowledge that people do pay attention to them. And they do have something to say. But actually, what they say needs to be taken in the aggregate, which is to say, you should be looking at all the different kinds of rankings that are out there, which will tell you, if you're a thinking person, which everybody is, that the names on those lists are changing all over the place. That's why the Forbes top 10 is different from the US News and World Report top 10, which is why it's different from the QS rankings right here, or different from the niche rankings here, or the Lumosity rankings here. And like I said before, the US News and World Report splits the universities and the colleges. Forbes does not. QS looks just at universities, research universities, but that's not as relevant, is it, for the undergraduate bachelor's degree. Lumosity, if you haven't heard of it, is a kind of mind exercise company that does these sort of game-like brain development activities. And they actually, by having students at universities do these different activities, they've ranked them according to how well they actually do on these brain-based analytical activities. And of course, you come up with yet a different list. So look at as many of these rankings as you can, because what it will do is expand your understanding of the variety of schools who crop up to the top, in the top 100, the top 200, the top 300. And if you well remember those pie graphs, the top 300 schools out of 3,000 gets you to that top 10%. Who wouldn't be pretty happy to be in a top 10% school? Well, guess what? You've got 300 to learn about, if you can, in the time. And look at how some of these rankings get obscure, but potentially useful once you've narrowed down your choices. Those schools that are allowing pets on campus. Again, they may not be ranked. These are lists as well as rankings. But you can see the whole strange variety. Colleges with winning tradition in speech and debate, etc. So these things exist out there. And again, why are they so different? Why are they coming up with different names? Different rankings? It's because each of them is going to use a different set of criteria for determining their ranking, and they're going to weight those criteria differently as well. And so if you're going to prioritize one ranking over another, it should be because you prioritize the weights and the ranking factors that ranking has prioritized. And if you sort of feel as good about the US News and World Report criteria as you feel about the Forbes criteria, as you feel about the niche criteria, well then guess what? You shouldn't rely on just one of those rankings to understand which school. And by the way, give or take, we really should be talking about deciles or whatever on these rankings, because you really can't say that the number 2 school is, measurably better than the number 12 school even. They're going to be very similar. Keep going here. Okay, so this is to throw a little vocabulary at you, and this is going to be something you'll have to wrap your head around as time goes forward. But there are all these different kinds of applications, and there's actually one on here that I should have put and didn't that I'll mention. But you've got rolling applications, early decision applications, early action applications, priority applications, regular decision applications, early decision 2 applications, and the one that I don't have written here is the early action single choice. And essentially, as you can sort of see here, rolling means that they make decisions as they go. So you make an application, and several weeks later you get a decision, and those decisions are constantly rolling out. Early decision is the big one you hear about, where you apply early, you get a decision early, which is to say mid to late December, and you must attend if you are accepted to that institution. Early action, you can apply early, get a decision early, but you're not required to attend. You can still make your decision along with all the other institutions you may have been accepted to. Priority is like an early action. Different schools call them different things, and they may have an earlier date and again an earlier notification of acceptance. And then there's good old regular decision, which actually still remains the largest pool of applications every year at every institution. And that's usually a January or February deadline, and all the decisions come out at the same time, which incidentally is the same for ED, same for EA. And ED2 is just ED with a slightly later um, application deadline, and they still give you but it's still a binding decision when they give it. So it's a bit confusing, and of course, who applies where and why is a matter of some strategy, but it's just being familiar with these so that you know deadlines and how the various applications will work timeline wise. It's important for everyone to know, a lot of families don't necessarily understand that an application to a university has two sources. And actually, I would say almost a third that I don't have pictured here that I'm going to mention. But the student applies and sends an application to the university with an essay, and all the demographic information of an application. And a student is responsible for sending test scores to the university through the testing agency, the College Board or ACT, and through TOEFL. The school, on the other hand, is responsible for sending a transcript and letters of recommendation. But those are two separate events, two different mailings, either electronic or otherwise, and they arrive together at the university and they compile the application to complete it. So there you have it, as I just mentioned. These are the things the school sends on behalf of a student, and these are the things the student, him or herself, sends. So either an application itself, that probably includes an essay, there may be supplementary questions, and then the testing also is required of students to be sent. So in case you're wondering about those different pieces of an application and how each one fits into the decision making, understand that the most important, regardless, is the transcript. And the transcript shows obviously the grades a student has had, and it will show the general rigor of what the school offers for students, but it's going to offer or give an insight to the particular rigor that a student has chosen in terms of, say, the number of academic courses they have chosen to take, or AP exam or AP courses that they've taken. Consistently, number two in the process of application decision making in terms of its importance is the testing itself. It's definitely after the transcript, but the testing is usually number two. And then there's usually a mixture of the essay, the extracurricular activities, and recommendations. And each school is going to weight those differently and consider them differently, but generally as coming after the transcript and testing. Just so you know, the school sends a profile. This is what it looks like. We will have it available for you on the website for you to look at, but this we send to schools. It's supposed to be a sort of insight into MDA, what we offer, who we are, and our origins, and then some information about the senior class and our students in general. So you'll be interested to get a look at that. For testing, as you are probably quite familiar, your choices really are the SAT or the ACT. Only certain schools, a very limited list of the most elite schools, require subject tests, which I'll look at here in a moment. Those are in these topics only. Wouldn't recommend our students do Spanish because everyone knows they speak Spanish, so that wouldn't be a really helpful one. But again, it's only certain schools that require those subject tests, and you'll want to speak with me about whether that's something to be considered in a particular student's case of preparation. Of course, the ACT is accepted everywhere the SAT is. It's not offered as often, and it's not something that's done as much by our students, but it is a possibility. And then, of course, we've got the TOEFL and IELTS, if you can read that there. I just want to point out this here, which is a site, fairtest.org, which is the ongoing and evolving list of schools that do not require the SAT or any testing for that matter. And they're increasingly getting recognizable, higher profile names joining that list. So I would encourage you to have a look at that and see if testing is not something that is going particularly well, then it's worth looking at those schools that don't require it. So just so you get a visual here on the sequencing of the tests, The College Board is now modifying the PSAT, and there's a sort of grade 8 and 9 PSAT that it will be coming out. Doesn't exist quite yet. And then in 10th and 11th grades, we administer the PSAT for our students. For the 11th graders, if they're U.S. citizens, their testing of the PSAT is the qualifying test for the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. That's what this stands for. And it means that if a student happens to get a score in the top 2%, maybe even 1%, so very, very good score, they may be eligible for a merit scholarship. And then it's during the latter half of 11th grade that students can be sitting for their actual SAT. They could do IELTS or TOEFL, but the reason it's bigger in 12th grade is because it makes sense to push this off. Because again, school is great practice for doing well in the IELTS and the TOEFL. So the more schooling you've had in English, the better chances you've got of getting a good score. And then again, you've got subject tests that you want to sort of take at the point of having gotten as much of the schooling as you can get in those subjects. So if you are going to do subject tests, which again will only be for a certain subset of very selective schools, you will need to consider taking them at the end of 11th grade or during 12th grade. So they are a factor, right? The extracurriculars that a student does. And we, of course, not just because of college admissions, we want our students to be doing extracurricular activities because in fact it's a broader part of their education, not just an academic education, but of course we know the values of sports, both team sports, individual sports, the arts, and of course community service, which we will do as a school, 80 hours required by MDA for graduation, but of course the benefits of community service are much greater than simply meeting MDA requirements. So quick word on essays. At least for the American university essay, it's a little bit different style than what a lot of other countries do. In other words, I've heard right from the mouth of college admissions officers that they really want it to be a conversational type style, as if the student is sitting and speaking with the admissions officer. Now they're not speaking, in slang or anything. They're speaking in a very articulate way, but it's that kind of tone that you want to strike with these essays. And they're trying to get to know just an aspect of you. You don't have to throw everything in the kitchen sink into an essay. You really want to focus on whatever the question is and some aspect of the student. And it's critical for the student to try to attain a voice that is authentic and theirs, and not just generic sounding. Move on from that. And I work with students, by the way, in developing their essays, and they will all have, and you can see my booklet that I wrote for writing essays. And then there's teacher recommendations. Now I've got in front of you here the recommendation guide for MDA teachers. And I just want you to have a look at that and understand, for example, that the recs should come from a teacher from 11th or 12th grade. The teacher rec is to focus on that student's work in the classroom. It's not about all the other extracurricular activities and things done outside of school and the family background. That's reserved for the school recommendation. And again, typically it's going to come from a teacher in a core class, although there are exceptions for specialized studies that students may want to do. And it's important to understand that these are going to be confidential from students and parents. It doesn't mean that we will be saying bad things, but it lends them greater weight in the process. And of course, the colleges consider them more seriously when they've been kept confidential. And of course, if a student has asked a teacher to write a recommendation and that teacher has agreed, they have agreed to advocate for that student. Let's talk about advocacy. So what's important for everyone to understand is that these recommendations are trying to advocate for students. It doesn't mean that they're supposed to not mention challenges that the student may have faced in a class, but they are to focus on how the student met those challenges and overcame those challenges and addressed the challenges. So the job of the teacher is to advocate truthfully, and that means painting an accurate but positive picture of the student. So I work with teachers to be sure that they're taking this to heart and writing very positive, supportive recommendations. And as part of our policy as a school as well, it's just worth your knowing that MDA does not report school discipline records during their time at MDA. And the only thing that we do is we report significant changes in grades, behavior, probation, suspension, or expulsion between the time of application and graduation. So if there's a change, in other words, to the student's status or what their schooling is entailing after they've actually submitted an application. But for anything before that, we simply do not disclose that. Now, it may be advisable for a student to disclose that, him or herself, and explain, without focusing on maybe the mistake that was made, sort of explain what was learned from whatever experience there mistake may have occurred. And it should be understood by everybody that the colleges understand that students make mistakes as ninth graders, as 10th graders. They're growing up. The question is not have they made mistakes and what were they? It's how have they responded after having made those mistakes. And believe me, students are accepted every year to the best schools everywhere, having made their mistakes, but having overcome them and gone on to do good things. So this is a quick slide to talk about something called hooks. And hooks are these things that sort of give a boost to an application, a particular boost that's beyond the transcript and the extracurricular activity, the particular extracurricular activities. And those can include special talents at the highest level, stage work, various sorts, performances in, high level music groups or theater groups, sports accolades, extraordinary achievements on the sports field of whatever sort. This represents a kind of diversity. In other words, is there a demographic? And this is where MDA students actually look very interesting to colleges to put into the mix of their student bodies. Is Hispanic, Central American, Jewish, Spanish-speaking student is someone interesting to them that they would like their other students to be interacting with and our students to interact with. So that's actually a bit of a hook right there. This represents legacy, which is to say a sibling or a parent or a grandparent has attended the institution, graduated in good standing, and that therefore gives a little boost to the student applying. And lastly, money, which I'm going to talk about for just a moment, because the money that gives a student a hook in the admissions process, we're not talking a few $1,000s here. We're talking, the ability of a family to donate a building or to found a program at a college or university. And not just that they have this money and this possibility, it's that they have a demonstrated track record of having donated money to other institutions prior to this application to this college institution. Which is to say, for example, if a student wanted to have or a family wanted to give their student a hook in the admissions process due to their family wealth, they would want to have demonstrated that they are willing and able to use this wealth toward educational ends, such as donating extra money toward causes relative to MDA. Just a little shameless plug there for donating money to the school. I did want to mention, as it's rolling out here, this new thing. It's just hit the news, and it's called the Coalition for Access, Affordability, and Success. And it's 80 schools, which include the most selective schools, including all the Ivies, have decided to make a new kind of application process. They've really decided to go away, in a way, from the college, from the common application. Now, this is very controversial. It doesn't actually exist yet. And it's so controversial that it probably is not going to exist the way that they have planned for it. In fact, they've planned rather poorly, because in the most recent big conference that occurred in California in October, there was a large outcry from high school side counselors about how this particular endeavor is not increasing or not really addressing what they're saying it's supposed to address, and it's actually complicating the college admissions process. And so stay tuned, but I did want to acknowledge that this is out there, and it's something to watch, but not to be concerned about at this point. So what is expected of parents and students going forward? As a student, we just want to be sure that they are really seeking out the challenges in school and doing their best, because obviously the transcript is the most important thing in this process. But also, as the broader part of their education, we want them to be involved in good ways in extracurricular things, whether they're school-sponsored or not. In fact, if they're doing something independent outside of school with another organization or on their own, that is viewed as a good thing. not everything that a student does beyond the classroom needs to be somehow offered and provided by the school. In fact, colleges like to see students that are doing things sort of their own initiative and independence. As parents, let's go back to that, zoom in. As parents, you want to be as supportive as you can in trying to keep your student challenged without them perceiving that you're nagging them. Easier said than done, I know. But anyway, if you're traveling in cities where there are colleges, or out of cities, but you're going by colleges, just take a half hour or 45 minutes or an hour and pop into a college. It doesn't matter whether it's one that you're familiar with or it's one your student may eventually apply to or not. Just to sort of get their feet wet and get them comfortable looking at campuses and seeing how many great places there are out there that are worth investigation. Just makes sense when you have some time during your vacations and travels. And this means follow, not literally, but it means let's keep in mind that it's your son or daughter who will be going to college. And so they really need to be taking the lead, as it were, in investigating and expressing their interests and exploring the kinds of places and programs that are of interest to them. And your job as parents will be to support that, obviously, and maybe have to pull them along at times, but we really want the students to be leading that process themselves. And then finally, as parents, it behooves you to just try to be as relaxed and unanxious and unstressed in this process. It will be stressful and anxious enough for the students that you should be that pillar of strength, and educate yourself. That means keep up on things. There's plenty in the news about it. A lot of it is meant to hype people, unfortunately, or it does stress people out. But the more you educate yourself, the more you read the real wide variety of commentary about developments in colleges, you'll understand that it really doesn't need to be the stressful process that many people make it out to be. And I hope that will be the case for you. And if we were together, I would take questions at this point, but I'm happy to take your questions by email or phone, or if you want a meeting, I'd be happy to chat with you. Thanks very much.